can you win a game of chess where every piece on the board is slowly moving at the same time? Because that's what flying is like. And that's what I really want to bring to people.
How many team members made up Lamina? So there was Sergio, Ben. You said about 25, didn't you?
Now it's 25. It was one for quite some time. It was just me. And then it was me and Sergio and Ben for quite some time. So for quite some time, there were just 3 of us. And then now, just like all of a sudden, we just popped up to 25 because basically writing a flight sim is just so much more complex than it used to be. Largely because of the graphics. I mean, the whole graphics requirements have just gone up through the roof, and it takes a lot more payroll to address all these new graphics technologies. So it'd be nice if programming got easier over time, but unfortunately, it's the opposite. Programming is getting harder over time because there's more coding techniques. There's more different ways to write code as new additions to the C++ language are always being added, and graphics technologies are always changing. So it's getting harder to write the code over time, and you have to write more of it because there's so much more going on with the rendering engine, just so much more. So unfortunately, it'd be nice if graphics are getting easier to do over time, but they're not. They're getting harder to do over time. So it now takes 25 people to do, the job that used to be done by one person, which is kind of weird for technology, isn't it? That's kind of the opposite of what we'd expect, but it's exactly what's happening.
So what do you, staying with graphics then, what do you find some of the, what is the most difficult or the most challenging aspect of
I guess there's just such a wide range of things that all have to be done. I mean, you want to build some scenery. Well, first you've got the let's say OpenStreetMap for the roads. You're like, okay, good, now I got global data. Then it turns out there's a bunch of errors where a bunch of people screwed up, right, when they were editing the roads. And then you think, oh, well, let me see if I can fix the errors. And then you find out there's cases where the math falls apart because nobody ever thought 15 roads would come together at one point, or something like that. Then your math breaks down. Then you finally get the math fixed. It's like, okay, now we have a road. Well, then how do we render it? Well, okay, now you got to come up with a texture. You think you're done with the texture, and you're like, well, wait a minute, asphalt just looks flat. It needs to have a different, reflection, so the sunlight comes off, so it really looks like asphalt, not dirt. The sun needs to reflect off of it. You're like, well, wait a minute, but the road doesn't fit into the terrain. It looks like somebody just painted a road on top of the desert. The thing about roads is they don't just sit on top of the terrain. They really integrate around the edges. And it really, when you don't have that, you can really notice it. And so it's just like, oh, and then of course, all of this varies depending on how the light, what is the angle? What is the brightness? How does that light interact with the road? And so it starts off as simple data, then turns into a problem of material science, and then how do you integrate multiple data sources, road, from OpenStreetMap, and elevation from the USGS? How do you get the pieces to fit together? And then all I'm talking about is the goal of what you want to do. That doesn't even start with how to do it, right? The actual graphics languages you need to actually do the job. And then once you got it working on Macintosh, on Metal, well, now you got to do Vulkan on Windows, and then what about Linux? And so then everything triples again when you got to get the graphics working on all 3 platforms. So it's just a tremendous amount of work, and it's like you never seem to be done. Now, the advantage to that, obviously, is we can keep making this better and better and better over time. So the fact that you're never done is perhaps a useful element of my business model, but it's constant ongoing work on the scenery. And we've gotten so much better, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's incredible how good our scenery has gotten. But look at it right now, And I mean, it's just like staring at me right in the face, all the things I want to be better. And especially for me, the thing that's bugging me about X-Plane scenery right now the most is just the interaction between the roads and the runways and the taxiways and the terrain. There's like no decent interaction around the edges of those things. And it really looks like it came out in 1990 or something like that. So getting the edges of the taxiways and the runways and the roads and getting to interact with the terrain where the terrain was like graded or lowered a bit, for the pavement to go into place, and the pavement's crumbling around the edges and the grass kind of grows up over the edge. All those things are on the edges of the pavement and the grass, edge of the pavement and the taxiways and the runways. Those are the things that I feel like we're really weakest on right now. And it's an incredibly annoying problem. Well, it's a fun problem and annoying at the same time. Annoying because it's so hard to come up with a solution. Fun because it means you get to sit there and code it. But it's a really tricky problem because the terrain elevation, it might have elevation points that are separated by, 1,000 meters, but you need to get it down to like 1/10 of a meter or 100th of a meter to get the little bevel of the pavement, right? Or the little sink down of the terrain right up against the runway. And so you have this ridiculous problem with scale where you're used to polygons that are 1 kilometer across to form a mountain, but then you need to get them a few centimeters across to get the little bevel in the edge of the pavement to make the pavement really looks like it's sitting on top of the terrain, or the terrain come down a few centimeters to get it look like it was graded to place the road. So it's a real problem of scale, trying to get all these little details along these tiny little areas, but still be able to handle worldwide terrain topography.
Yeah,
Scale problem.
How do you work that out? Considering the amount of airports which are in X-Plane, thousands. How do you go about, doing that amount?
Not very well, in my opinion, is how we do right now. So what you do is you go into the scenery editor, and you make your little airports in the airport gateway. And sure, I mean, you can make the runways, and we're making it so that new airports do automatically generate edges for new runways and taxiways. But there's thousands of airports and stuff out there that don't have those edges generated. And our roads do not have those edges generated. And so we're just kind of stumbling along bit by bit. Now, as far as the actual math for doing the edge of the runways in the new airports on the airport gateway, that's in Ben's territory, not mine. So I'm not the right person to ask for the technical details. Although I can tell you right now, I mean, I can pretty much draw it for you. The issue is you've got, let's say that, these are the terrain polys here, right? Let's say there's a couple terrain polys and they're 1 kilometer across, and then boop, 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 boop. There we go. A runway, goes right across the middle of them. Then the thing is, you might need to get that runway, rendered like it really looks 3D with the interaction of the terrain with the runway. You might need, 1,000 little polygons or 10,000 tiny little polygons all around that runway to really make it look three-dimensional. And then they have to fit in that gigantic polygon and interact with it properly without making it just look like another problem. And so it's super, super tricky because you have these tiny little polygons trying to interact with these gigantic polygons. It's like trying to go out and fix, potholes in the road with a little thing of Elmer's glue. It's like there's a real scale problem here.
You mentioned grass, kind of like, is that something, we have the grass texture, are we going to be seeing an improvement with 3D grass or anything like that?
Of course, the only time is when. So, I mean, our trees in version 12 absolutely kick butt. If you go into the graphics screen, you'll check the little box for 3D trees. I mean,
absolutely,
our trees are awesome. They're incredible. And if you set some wind, you'll notice them blowing in the wind. I mean, our 3D trees are beyond insane. And so it's inevitable that we'll apply that technology or a similar technology to the grass. But obviously the trees are more important because they're 1,000 times bigger than grass. And the grass, that's a smaller thing, but it'll take just as much work, right? The grass is 1,000th the size of the trees, but it'll take just as much work to do it. When you see that, it suddenly becomes obvious why it's what you do second, not what you do first.
So are you saying that the grass will sway in the same direction as?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm not going to be happy until the helicopter comes in and the grass goes, out in every direction radially from the wash to the helicopter. So when you get the helicopter, you see the grass, away from you. But before we can do that, there's another thing that has to be done. we have to come up with a global three-dimensional wind model that is not just based on real weather. It's not just based on user input, but instead it is actually tracking the wash coming from each actual airplane. And that's from every rotor in every direction, and then tracking that wash in three-dimensional space as it interacts with the grass or with other airplanes. And I made the first tiny, feeble little attempt at that with wake turbulence. If you turn on AI airplanes in X-plane, you go in a little, say, get my Lancer Evolution, a little fast little single engine prop, get behind a Boeing 737 on final approach, boom, that wake turbulence will flip you over. And so I've got the very beginnings of this interaction with wake turbulence, but that's only like a one-off tech demo, hack together, barely works type thing, because it's not really done until every airplane emits all of its air from all of its wingtips and props and motors and everything else. And that interacts with all of the things in the world, airplane, grass, trees, et cetera. In other words, what we really need is a complete, total three-dimensional bookkeeping of all the air motion in the world. And what's kind of interesting about that is there might be 1,000,000 times more memory and CPU power than what we have now, which is just little wake turbulence coming out of the wingtip of each airplane. But it might only make the game 50% more fun, right? And so it makes X-Plane 50% more fun, but takes 1,000,000 times the memory and CPU.
I was about to say that's a lot.
But it will be worth it. It will be worth it because computers get so fast and have so much memory. It's like, 1,000,000 times the memory, who cares, right? That's going to happen. And so there will become a point where it is still worth it. But we do things in order. We don't try and do the thing that's 1,000,000 times the resource, consumption for 50% more fun when, pretending to fly an airplane. Not until that extra memory and CPU is readily available, which of course is happening over time.
So how much does hardware then dictate your direction of X-Plane?
Well, like it or not, I'm sitting here running this thing on a Mac Studio, and if it works on my Mac Studio, I'm happy. But we've got testers that run on other machines, so The name of the game is, it is pointless to write software that cannot run on the best hardware. And so if all the sliders are over to the right, everything is absolutely just maxed out to the maximum, that should deliver a barely acceptable frame rate, just barely acceptable frame rate on the absolute top end, high end machine. Because if you tune it that way, what does that mean? It means it got all the graphics anybody could ever handle. And then drag the sliders down, and then you need to be able to run with fine frame rate on low-end machines. I guess in a perfect world, when all the graphic sliders are down at the bottom of the range, then that means it should just barely be okay on the absolute worst machine you could ever run X-Plane on. And that's the proper way to tune graphics load for the computers.
Right. Okay. So by doing that, then your target audience, it's a safe bet from people with low end and high end. You pretty much cater for everybody.
Yeah, no question. I mean, that's what the graphical sliders are for. It's so that they can tailor the machine tailor the sim for the widest range of machines we want to sell to. Yeah. And then who we wind up selling to, as far as what computers we support, winds up coming down to, do they support the latest graphical, APIs, specifically Metal and Vulkan, and do they have enough memory to hold at least the minimum spec of the sim?
You find it easier to work with NVIDIA hardware over?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. NVIDIA makes the best drivers. Over and over, we find NVIDIA makes the best drivers and gives the best performance. Yeah.
What is the problem with AMD then? What is the stumbling block with them?
I don't know what it is internally. I only know what I observe. And what I observe is bugs in the drivers that seem to take an incredibly long time to get fixed. That's my observation. But I don't want to talk stank about somebody else's company. So, I'm not going to what's going on.
No, that's fine.
I just know that it's like there's another bug in the driver, and then we have to wait forever to get for it to get fixed. So, and then we have to work around it. Of course, we do our graphics. So that's very frustrating.
Okay, so NVIDIA is at the moment the choice of company for graphics.
Windows. For
Yeah.
Windows video cards, yes. On Macintosh, it's whatever they decide to put in there. I don't have a history of seeing a lot of video card driver bugs on the Mac because they kind of
Okay. What about talk to me about cores? For somebody, sorry, Austin, talk to me about cores, CPU cores, so somebody, just coming into flight simulation now, they're looking at a new computer or whatnot, explain how many cores does it actually use, and what should they be buying?
Right now, it really fully utilizes one core. Just so annoying. So annoying, so annoying. Now, it will use 20 cores, okay, or 24 cores or 36 cores, okay? It is multi-threaded. It will use a ton of cores. The problem is it depends on the main thread, which is the first core, for too much of the work. It is not yet smart enough to distribute the workload across as many cores as possible. So if you get a lot of cores, they'll get used, but only one of them's really going to be running at 100%. The other guys will be like, I'm waiting for something to do now. So without question, we need to be way more multi-core, and we're getting there. We're getting there by bits and pieces. The reason it's so hard to write is because when you wrote everything to run on write all the code, right, to run on one core, spit off these different processes, they can be accessing the same memory as the main thread. And if you're accessing, and worse yet, modifying, really it's a modification, it's not the access. If you're modifying memory on the main thread while it's being read on a separate thread, that's a crash. That's a crash right there. And so allocating the sim to run on many different cores is way, way harder than it sounds, because nobody's allowed to modify anything about the world while the other cores are reading about it. So it's nightmarishly difficult. And if you look at kind of a relatively simple game where all it does is say, okay, I'm going to draw the world and the guy's got a gun and he's shooting people. Well, that's pretty easy to multi-thread because there's not that much physics going on. But there's so many physics and boats and aircraft carriers and airplanes and birds and other airplanes interacting with your airplane, and tow planes and multiplayer planes and AI planes and air traffic control all at the same time, all in different threads. It just gets way, way harder to multi-thread because there's all this different data that's being manipulated in all these different ways.
Do you see this changing at all in the future?
Gradually over time, we're gradually making X-Plane more and more what we call thread safe over time, which lets us spawn out into more and more threads. So that's being done over time now.
So 12.06, so we've got frame rate optimizations. Did you mention the clouds? Was there performance increase with the clouds? Because the clouds have changed. The clouds have changed quite a bit since the initial. I'm from when I first experienced X-Plane 12 from the beta release to now. They've come on a long way.
Oh yeah, hugely. Yeah. Is working crazily. I mean, at first it was like, can we do volumetric clouds? And then can we get them to move? Can we get them to change over time and move with the wind? And now the question is starting to become, okay, now how incredibly realistic can we make them, and how fast can we make them, and how little RAM can they use? We have RAM available for other things. So yeah, we are rapidly evolving on these clouds. Kind of an interesting thing is we were moving to get version 12.0 out the door, 8 months ago or 9 months ago or whatever it was. The whole mantra inside the company was, just get it shipped, get it shipped. We don't have time to perfect anything. We just got to get it shipped. Anything that slows down version 12.0, we can't do. Well, okay, now we're past that. We got 12.0 out. And now it's not the panic thing where nobody can do anything if it might slow down 12. No, that's not the case anymore. Now the question is, how quick can we do cool stuff? We have a sim out there. We have a sim, that's selling on the web and paying our salaries. So now we can allocate the time to say, all right, what's the best thing we can do with this sim? So it's a very nice place to be. When it comes to learning what aviation is about, what an airplane flies like, what you care about in aviation, what matters, how you operate an airplane, there's no question in my mind at all, X-Plane is the best sim there is. Now, there are other sims that are better than X-Plane at specific things, right? DCS, Digital Combat Sim. That's got to be, I mean, I haven't flown it. I've only seen a bunch of videos of it when people keep saying, you got to do like DCS. But from what I've seen, their combat sims and so much of their rendering is absolutely incredible. And now you look at Microsoft 2020. Well, they've got this like incredible model of the world that looks just like the real world from 5,000 feet up, right? When you get below 5,000 feet, you start finding all the errors. But each sim out there has its own strengths and weaknesses. And many people say, well, X-Plane strength is a flight model. But I think it's more than that. X-Plane really lets you feel what it's like to be in the aviation world.
It does. And do you think enough people know that?
No. People think of X-Plane as just having the best flight model, but it's not the best flight model, it's the best overall aviation experience. Do people realize that? Was your question? My answer is no. I don't think they do. I don't think they do realize it. But the reason I don't let that cost me too much sleep is the fact that the demo is out there. And so anybody that wants to can easily and freely find out for themselves.
Do you not feel that people are missing out though?
They are missing out. They're absolutely missing out. But, whenever somebody makes a good documentary movie, I'm sure the person that made the documentary feels a little frustrated when 1,000 times more people go to see The Avengers 32, Hulk versus She-Lawyer, or whatever crap they're trying to sell you that day.
Yeah.
Crap sells. Crap sells. There's more Burger Kings in the world than fine restaurants, right? Hey, how much of a jackass can I be when I eat at Burger King more often than I eat at nice restaurants myself, right? So let me just put that out there, but it's always easy. I think what it really is there's a tremendous human compulsion to buy what we know, right? To get what we've heard of, what we grew up with, what we know. And so I'll be in a foreign city and I'll be like, I just feel like a good old fashioned McDonald's. And, it's just human tendency to get what we know. And, and so maybe that's why some brands, just succeed at the massive level. It's like, once you know Apple, once you know Microsoft, that's where you're going to go. But
do you not get frustrated? Do you not get frustrated sometimes though? If you go onto YouTube and you type in flight simulation, you see this kind of like crappy video of Microsoft Flight Simulator with some kind of like,
I don't get as frustrated as you might think, because with the X-Plane demo being out there for free, anyone that wants to try it can. There's obviously nothing, there's nothing wrong with you want multiple sims. It's good. It's good for competition for there to be multiple sims. I get a little bit frustrated because I know that Microsoft doesn't have the flight model X-Plane has, and Microsoft doesn't really make you feel, how airplanes really work like X-Plane does. And it's a little frustrating because I have got an email from someone that says that when you go into Asobo's studio, they've all got X-Plane home use, and they're all just copying X-Plane. They're trying to copy X-Plane into Microsoft Flight Sim. And I have this from somebody that's literally been into the facility. It's just X-Plane everywhere. And they're like, now what do I have to do? And they're kind of copying me. It's a little bit frustrating, but it's not that frustrating because I get to build the sim that I want to sim, right? Or that I want to fly. I get to build a sim that I want to fly. And everybody that wants to try it can try it. And plenty of people understand what X-Plane is and they enjoy it. Our sales numbers aren't that small. I'm doing quite well. So I'm not that frustrated, but I guess every artist thinks that his art is the art that everybody should be looking at, right? I think that's just more human nature.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Because I've got both. I use both. I've even got the old ones. And I've tried the airliners, and the airliners, they don't feel right. There's just something about them. You go into X-Plane, you try the jets. It just feels, the way it works, it just feels more alive.
Oh, and there's no question. We were flying Microsoft Flight Sim the other day in an Airbus A320. And let me tell you about the Airbus flight control system, okay? The way the Airbus flight control system works is the airplane tries to hold 0 roll rate. And then as you command the stick, the airplane will go up to 30 degrees bank by itself. And if you add more stick, it'll go up to, I want to say like 60 degrees bank or something like that. And if you release the stick, then it'll come back to 30, not 0. And you have to input again to bring it back to 0. And so the way the Airbus flight control system works is it's always trying to keep the airplane right side up. It'll go up to 30 degrees at bank, and you can take your hands off the stick and it'll hold 30. If you really force hard by holding the stick, it'll go up to 60. This is all done with the Airbus flight control software, actually, driving the ailerons. And it's similar with pitch, right? It'll go to a certain pitch attitude with the stick, but then it gets into what's called envelope protection, where it's either going too fast or too slow, too high an angle of attack, and all these things will cause it to lower the nose. And so all of this is built into the Airbus flight control system. We've programmed all of this in X-Plane. X-Plane does all of this. And it does this by actually driving the flight controls. Nothing is faked, all right? At no point is X-Plane going to say, oh, better not go above 30 degrees. We'll just lock at 30 degrees. No.
Right.
The laws of physics don't work that way. It's neither does the sim. So X-Plane will actually apply the flight controls just the way the Airbus does. And then when you put in the turbulence and all the air, is in driving the wing, right? So the wing's getting driven by all the wind and turbulence, and then the flight controls are fighting against that to try and hold the airplane level. And so you get all the imperfections as the flight control system is arguing with nature to try and hold a pitch and a roll despite the air always moving. So there's always little errors before the flight control system can react. X-Plane is doing all of this. I was flying Microsoft Flight Sim the other day in an Airbus with a friend, and we put the stick over to see what would happen, and the airplane just started doing rolls like an aerobatic airplane. It's hopeless. It's hopeless. It's absolutely hopeless. But, hey.
And do you know what? And it's strange because, as a kid, I always fantasized about kind of, about many things, but mainly kind of like with flight simulation about this world, which kind of like, where you could see your house or do this or whatnot, and of course, Microsoft Flight Simulator allows you to do that. But for all that so-called realism, I don't find it appealing. And there's many people with the same thinking, because it just doesn't feel alive. It just feels
flat. Google Earth Viewer. It's like a glorified Google Earth Viewer. And it's better than X-Plane in certain things. If you want to learn, where's the water tower where I make my turn, onto base, or where do I find the following thing because I need to familiarize myself with the airport. Microsoft is better than X-Plane at those things. So it has its strengths, but I guess it's no surprise that X-Plane has developed along the lines that seem important to me as I fly airplanes. Here, I'll give you an example. So I fly a Lancer Evolution, and maybe pop up a little screenshot of the airplane. I'll send it to you after this interview. And it's very, very common for me. In fact, I'd say it's standard. It's normal that when I do the takeoff, I'm out the window and I'm seeing the runways and the edge of the runways. Edge of the runway, we talked about that a little bit today, haven't we? And so I'm seeing the runway and the edge of the runway and the pavement. I'm getting a sense of what the airplane is doing compared to the runway and compared to the world. And then that nose comes up. And now I'm almost instantly, it's this quick glance to make sure I'm not confused about what the obstacle situation is out there. And then it's down into the panel. Now it's all about what is the pitch, what is the speed, what are the engine temperatures, what's the engine torque, is the airplane doing what it's supposed to do, am I getting the speed I expect, the climb rate, the torques, is anything going over temperature, is all the airplane doing what it's supposed to do? Now let's get that gear up. Is it accelerating like I want it to accelerate? How are we doing with the airspeed? How are we doing with the altitude? How are we doing with the vertical speed? The roll is okay, right? I'm not going to do something stupid like start to roll over into the ground. Those often happen at the beginning of the flight, by the way, not the end. And now let's get the flaps up. Is it doing what it's supposed to do? Now we're starting to pick up some altitude. How are we doing with pressurization? Did the pressurization system come online? Now let's start to get this thing going where it needs to go. Am I on course? Now it's time to pick up a clearance. Now let's get with air traffic control. Let's get that clearance picked up. All right, this guy clearance, he's only clearing me up to 12.5. I'm already coming up on 12.5. Now I need to start reducing power. All right, we're up at 12.5. We're reducing power. Where the hell's my clearance? I'm supposed to be up at 280. Here it comes. Now let's get up to 280. Uh-oh, now the air is starting to get thinner. My engine temperature is going to get higher for a given torque. Let's go on ahead and start to bring that throttle back just a little bit as that temperature comes up, as the air cools down, and we've got less air to carry the heat away from the engine, and the temperatures start coming up. Now I need to get the nose down. It's no longer a 15-degree climb. Now we're down to a 10-degree climb as you get into thinner air. All right, now we're starting to get up towards 280. Now the speed's starting to build. Now the Mach number is starting to come into play. We don't just have a higher airspeed, but we have a Mach number. Is the airplane accelerating like it's supposed to? Is there any drag? All right, now let's get the autopilot engaged. Now the autopilot's got us in cruise. Now we're going to check the fuel. We're at the top of our climb. We're pointed where we want to go. We're at the right altitude. The engine's doing what it's supposed to do. The airplane's doing what it's supposed to do. Then let's see what the fuel is going to be when I arrive. All right, I think I'm going to have okay fuel. Now that I've done that, for the first time in the entire flight, let's look out the window for a second. And that is literally how I fly. And so it's no surprise that when I wrote X-Plane, I did all the stuff I just said, not built a scenery viewer. Because a scenery viewer, I mean, I can go look at Google Earth if I want a scenery viewer.
How do you please people, though, who want to look at their houses?
Well, okay, so I guess, as I think you've probably gotten, so I have a theory about people. The older we get, the less we care about what other people think. I think, and I've seen this with old people, right? Jerry Seinfeld did an incredible routine on this. He's like, the older I get, the more I can just pretend I'm deaf and ignore people, and not pay attention to him. And what was he like? He's like, right now, if somebody calls me, I can just be like, I'm busy. But when I'm really old, this is Jerry Seinfeld, he was doing this. He goes, and when I'm really old and people start yelling at me on the street, I'll just keep on walking like I don't even hear them. So I think as people get older, they just lose their incentive to try to please everyone. And so, and I'm 50 something years old, 52, 53, something like that. And I guess I don't want to please, my goal isn't to please everyone. My goal is to build what I believe is the best flight simulator. And I believe the best flight simulator does all the things I just talked about. Now, you want the visuals also. The visuals get very important when it comes to clouds and sky, because that's what you're actually having to navigate around to get where you're going. And so the sense of being, have you ever done scuba diving before?
No.
Oh, it's incredible. It's incredible. In high visibility water, it's absolutely incredible because you actually feel like you're flying because you are weightless and you can see all these things. You go up, over, and under the boat, over the rocks. It's incredible. It's like flying. And so when you're flying, it's just kind of like scuba diving where you're working like a fish through this three-dimensional topography of clouds. And so I think rendering graphics are very, very, very important when it comes to the clouds, because that's what you're moving around. Very important when it comes to the runway and the airport environment, because that's where you need to really be handling your airplane properly. And in the future, yeah, we need grass and trees to blow in the rotor wash of helicopters for when helicopters land. And you'll notice all of these things I'm talking about as being important are the exact things we were talking about earlier in this interview as things that we are doing. And that's no coincidence, no surprise. So I have taken Microsoft Flight Sim to look at my house. I have. And it was just the most pathetic experience. So I live in a place called Forest Acres. And as you may be able to tell by the name, it's foresty. And all you see when you try to go over my house in Microsoft is just this kind of like canopy of low-res, polygon, confused trees, as captured by a radar scan somewhere. Couldn't even see my house. So it just, so the way X-Plane does it is it's got, as we also talked about earlier in this interview, OpenStreetMap, raw data for roads, and then it plants little houses beside these roads, generic houses, and it plants these wonderful, incredible, detailed three-dimensional trees along the road as well. And so in X-Plane, I can way more tell what's going on when I actually see the road, see the individual trees, see the houses. With Microsoft, it's just this kind of blurry radar mess of tree canopy. It looks like you're over the rainforest or something. And so, but in X-Plane, there's no way I'm going to see my individual house. All I'm going to see is a generic house along my street, which is maybe not as satisfying. So this is an area where you could absolutely say Microsoft is stronger than X-Plane because, hey, at least they're trying, right? At least they got a radar scan of what's really there. But, in my case, the radar scan is nothing but treetops. But, with X-Plane, it's generic. With Microsoft, it's a really, really, really solid attempt at being real. And so, Microsoft is better in many ways. It's better at trying to figure out where the big landmarks are, the recognizable landmarks. But for me, once I get down to low altitude, the whole illusion just kind of falls to pieces.
You mentioned OSM, how often is that updated?
I'm not sure. I don't do that myself anymore. I got a guy that does all the OSM data and he packages up and then delivers to Ben to be turned into actual graphics code. And sorry, just pulled an iPad down. Sorry. I'm not sure how often it's updated, but it's funny. When I first started writing X-Plane, it was back in the days of America Online, and I found out you could download terrain elevation from the United States Geological Survey. And this is back when we had like the little dial-up modems, going, and I literally downloaded the entire world of elevation data through America Online, like over this, I think it was a dial-up modem. If it wasn't dial-up modem, it was certainly phone speed. And it was literally, I think, about a month of continuous download. And then like my America Online bill was like, $4,000 or something like that, because like nobody expected you to get that much. And so it was me getting all the data initially, but now, it's about 25 or 30 of us. There is a guy that does the data acquisition, and he packages it up and tries, as we were talking about earlier, tries to work out the errors, find a case, where the data is wrong, find the cases where it results in a mathematical problem, like with a lot of roads all coming together to one point. And so he packages all that up into a nice, tight, coherent package. And then he sends that to Ben. And then Ben runs his scenery generating algorithm on that data to pop out the scenery. And then what do you get? Well, you get roads that are accurate and terrain that's accurate, but very generic houses, which has always been X-Plane's weak point. But then these very nice, 3D trees. Now we plant, all these wonderful 3D trees around. And the next level, of course, is to do better than generic houses, right? The next level is to try to actually get house footprints, which apparently is also available from some online sources. So that's what we're starting to look at next. Can we get the houses to have the right footprint as the real house? Can we start getting satellite photos to see what terrain texture to use based on the color of the terrain according to the satellite photos? You see, so we're going to keep on upping the realism as we get more data sources, and then hopefully make the simulator less and less generic over time.
It must be quite challenging, kind of like, to get those terrain textures to be how you want them to be.
Oh, yeah. It all started off with Sergio Santagata 20 years ago saying, well, how do I get a field? How do I get a forest? How do I get a rocky face? And I still remember he came up with maybe 100 different generic terrain textures. And then just over time, we try and make those better and add more of them. And in the future, we'll have presumably a gigantic texture library of textures where we look at satellite photos, look at the color of an area, and then decide on the high-res texture to use based on what the satellite photo saw. And you'll notice that's my pitch here, instead of saying just use the satellite photo directly, because I have not found a way, doesn't mean it can't be done, just means I haven't found a way. I've not found a way to use the satellite photos to come up with any kind of scenery I would ever want. Because I am so sick of these satellite photos that have the tops of cars painted onto the road, that have buildings with the shadows painted onto the street. I'm just so, and they're always blurry and grainy and low res because they have to be big enough to cover the whole planet Earth. And so I've just seen it done wrong so many times. I cannot get excited about that particular way of scenery.
Yeah, how do you go about that? Because of course, you've got the streaming method with Microsoft Flight Simulator, so it goes down that route or whatnot, and then you've got your route, which you've kind of like, which has got the tile set built in. What is the middle ground? Because of course, people don't want to download, they don't want to stream. They want, how do you get that realism?
Well, my answer is to continue to get more raw data sources. And as we get more raw data sources, our generic scenery becomes less and less generic without losing detail, without going grainy, without becoming just a radar mess of polygons and reflections. My goal is to come up with more data sources to make the generic scenery so close to the real scenery that you're like, oh, that's not my house, but it's a house of the same footprint in the same location. I get it. I'm flying an airplane in this neighborhood. I got it. So my goal is to come up with something that is not just a low-res, blurry, grainy, miscolored, static copy of the world, but has so much data about the world that I can build something that's really highly, highly detailed.
Right. Yeah, I think because talking to quite a few people, I think that's one of the things which they're probably looking forward to the most, is kind of like the improvements and kind of like the housing and the ground texture, what that sits on at the moment. Yeah, a lot of people use Ortho for XP, but of course that has its limitations because it's just so bloody massive, the files. It takes ages to download. You end up with, you've just lost 10 gigs of hard disk space, and a lot of it is a mishmash of bad. You've got clouds over buildings or hills, and it just doesn't look right.
Yeah, it can't. There's like the siren's call of saying, let's just take a copy of the world and dump it into the simulator. And you just get, you're not getting the world, you're getting a snapshot of what the world looked like in a moment in time. It's kind of like a Twilight Zone episode, like where the guy is like the only person left on planet Earth and the whole world is just frozen. It's sort of like that. And for me, having a snapshot of the world that's frozen in time, well, that's like the exact opposite of what it's like to fly an airplane. When you're in an airplane, everything is changing and dynamic. The fuel is going down. The oil temperature is maybe coming up to a certain point. The de-icing fluid is coming down. The sun is not going to stop its march across the sky based on your schedule. The weather is going to change as it's going to change. Fronts are going to move through. Clouds are going to rain. All of this thing, all of the world is always changing as you fly, and your airplane is always changing as you fly. And you've won when you can land the airplane before it runs out of its ability to serve you in a location where Mother Nature has allowed you to do what you want to do, right? All these things have to happen at the same time if you have a successful outcome of a flight. And for me, winning an X-plane is not saying, oh, I can see my house. Now what am I going to do with the simulator? No. That's not winning for me. For me, winning is when you can get in a simulator and feel that feeling of accomplishment from completing a flight that I feel when I complete a flight. And the way to feel that sense of accomplishment is to be in a world that is extremely dynamic, always changing, the airplane gradually consuming itself, the weather gradually changing, the light gradually going away as we move later into the day. Can you win a game of chess where every piece on the board is slowly moving at the same time? Because that's what flying is like. And that's what I really want to bring to people. And I'm not going to bring that to people by just taking a snapshot of the Earth as it existed at a moment and saying, well, now I can see my house. No, there's a lot more to aviation than that. And it's dynamic and ever changing. That's what has to be in a good flight simulator, in my opinion.
I think this is why you've got such a loyal following, because of your passion for that, for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. I was going to ask you, you mentioned housing. So is it going to be regional housing? So you've got, you talked about OSM data, the buildings with the right footprint and also the right texture, but going from different countries, different, so you've got houses in Australia, of course, they've got the flat roofs, red roofs. Well, they've got lots of colors of roofs, but kind of like they have a certain style. So is that in your plan?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as I was saying a little bit earlier, the whole idea is the more data you can get and the more raw resources you have, the more you can customize the auto-generated scenery to match the real world. And certainly different architecture and styles of houses and roof colors and building layouts. And we already have this to a certain degree. Although I will say, every time I fly X-plane, it looks like every single thing is Branson, Missouri. It's all these generic American, 1970s ranch houses. So we have a long ways to go. But without question, I want to have regional architecture, no question.
At least, well, yeah, I kind of like the improvements which you did for the UK anyway. Were welcomed.
Great.
Well,
there we go. Yeah. Step in the right direction. Oh, yeah. And our air traffic control guy. I got Jim here working on that. He's in the UK and England, and he's working on getting like controllers with different like accents and voices and procedures and things like that in ATC. So
yeah,
and I think accents in the United States as well. I think he said he's working on getting the Boston accent in Boston, the New York accent in New York. And certainly when I fly my real airplane, I go a lot between South Carolina and Vermont. And when I'm working from South Carolina, I've got the good old Southern controllers, where it just fit like a well-worn glove, just fits like a glove. And then you start to get to Boston and they start talking like this. In New York, they're always in a hurry, and it's funny. You actually do get the sense you're traveling across the nation as you pick up these different accents en route, which I love, absolutely love. And it's another little bit of the dynamic world that I want to bring into the sim.
And you know what? It very much works because, again, going back to Microsoft Flight Simulator, it's such an immersion killer, flying to different parts of the world and just hearing the same American accent, over and over again. It just destroys it. And one of the things which I enjoyed so much about X-Plane 12 was the regional voices. Brilliant. you know, it makes so much difference. It's yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And I use air traffic control myself rather seldom, which is why I'm not totally up to date on exactly how far they've taken that right now. Because for me, it's all about the physics. But yeah, I should obviously get back on that air traffic control, because I should have known I wasn't sure how far along we are with those accents. But that's great that we've already got it to the point you can know.
It's brilliant, Austin. It's kind of yeah, it's one of those things which I always wanted, and then kind of like X-Plane 12. Yeah, excellent. You know, going back to you were talking about the different houses. For people using the gateway to submit kind of airports and what, are there new assets? Are new assets coming? Art assets so that they can.
Yes. Yeah, in a word, yes. So we've got all kinds of hangars and control towers and those things that are like those kind of like, you know, dirigible, you know, containing things, and those like basic huts they put over fighter jets and stuff like that. We have got lots and lots and lots of those, and fuel tanks and, you know, fuel farms. We've got tons of assets that are being developed right now, and they're absolutely incredible, absolutely incredible. But it's the same problem that I alluded to, I think, early in this interview, which is who gets to get out there first. And right now it's about 1206 and these clouds, but all those other assets, they are going to work in the sim in the fullness of time. Yeah, I'll tell you, one of the frustrating things that's disappointed me is we had an incredible F4 Phantom ready for 12.0, but it wasn't quite done. And we still haven't gotten it out there because the artist is always just like, well, I need one more thing. And there's other things that are more important than an F4 Phantom. And so we have some incredible, incredible art assets sitting in the wings. It's just, we literally, it's like we seem constrained by test time. It's like almost how fast we test stuff to make sure it's okay to release. I envision a world where you maybe have an installer that lets us install all kinds of different branches and test versions of X-Plane. It's like everybody can be testing X-Plane all at once, all different features and branches. That might be kind of a game changer for how quickly we can do updates. It's almost like it's not just the quality of the sim, it's the rate of change of the quality of the sim is the thing we start looking at. And isn't that interesting? You know, as we move into the future, things change faster and faster. And it's so much of what I've been focused on recently, it's not how good X-Plane is. It's how quickly it's changing. How quickly can I get it to improve? Can we test faster? Can we get these releases in faster? Do I have to wait for the clouds to do my stuff? How about we do both at the same time? And so, which takes us right back to the problem where X-Plane is really only completely utilizing one core, even though there's 20 cores. We need to make X-Plane and X-Plane's release and testing more multi-threaded. We need more things happening at the same time. It's all about the rate of change.
Does the community push you to release things quicker than what you would like?
No, I always push harder than anyone else. If anything, it's the other way around. I'm constantly pushing out this new stuff, and people are like, why did you change it? It was perfect before. Well, no, it really wasn't perfect before. It's better now. But if anything, I change things too fast, and people get frustrated when they have to update their aircraft models and stuff like that, or change the way they fly.
Okay, right. Okay, Austin, do you know what? I don't want to take up any more of your time.
I don't know what else we have to cover. I mean, anything you want. I'm not in a super hurry.
Do you know what? I think
over juiced or in a hurry. It's just because I've been drinking too much iced tea, and so I'm like like this right now. But
I'm aware of your time. So yeah, I kind of I think I've pretty much covered everything really.
Okay.
And no, thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoy it. It's always interesting to talk to you because you have, you know, your passion is you know, it's so obvious, and I don't think you'd get that from a company beginning with M.
Yeah. Well, you know, these days people are just so afraid they might say the wrong thing. That it's like people are afraid to say anything at all, and I'm so over that. God, I'm so over that. I'm so over the self-censorship thing. So over it. So yeah, I'm going to speak very freely about exactly what I'm thinking at any given time.
No, and it's appreciated as well. No, well, Austin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.